Our final named lecture is a Claude Organ Memorial Lecture, and this has been a long-standing tradition of the Southwestern Surgical, and I'm truly honored to introduce Dr. Sean Okotari from the Gunderson Healthcare System in La Crosse, Wisconsin, as our speaker. And I think all of you know him. He's the program chair this year and has done an outstanding job. And just like our other two named lectures, Dr. Okotari is a true friend and probably one of my very best friends in surgery. We actually met in 2001 when he was an MIS and bariatric surgery fellow at the Medical College of Virginia, and I was taking the course to learn how to do laparoscopic gastric bypasses. And Dr. Okotari was actually nearing the end of his fellowship. We hit it off. We went out to dinner the night of the course, and since I needed a proctor, I said, "Why don't you come out and be my proctor?" And so I was actually his first true employer, because he got paid for that proctorship even before he started working at the Gunderson Healthcare System. And I invited him. He came to Northwestern and proctored us, and we've been the best of friends ever since. So it's been 13 years. Shauno actually attended medical school at the University of Illinois in Peoria and completed his surgery training at Gunderson. And even after those 5 winters there, he still went back there, but that's for another talk. So after completing his fellowship, he returned to Gunderson. He's currently director of minimally invasive bariatric surgery for Gunderson Health, and he has been since 2001 when he returned. For a guy of his youth, he is currently the president of the Wisconsin Surgical Society, which is quite an honor at his age. And he, as you may have heard yesterday at the business meeting, he is our next secretary-treasurer for the organization. So he's quite an accomplished guy for being so young. He's always willing to contribute, and he's a surgeon, I can tell you from working with him in the operating room and visiting him up in La Crosse. He juggles his busy professional life and has a wonderful family life. His wife, Peg, is here today. And when I had to appoint a program chair after assuming the presidency or being president-elect, there was really only one person on my list, and that was Shauno. He has been absolutely the most supportive and dearest friend I've had in surgery for many years now. He's been an active contributor here. He's actually been instrumental in adding our second floating state, Wisconsin, to the map. And I know Shauno was thinking that maybe he got off a little easy with this intro, but so this is actually, if you don't, for those of you who played golf last year, this is the Sandpiper Golf Club in Santa Barbara, and Shauno is here, obviously, and here's me 1 foot shorter than him, but we actually changed up our team this year. We tried to bring in a couple of ringers, and we still couldn't win, but you might wonder why it's called Surgical Lessons from the Lake, and Shauno is a real water buff, and looking at this picture, I asked myself, why did they pick Russell Crowe to play Noah? And then I saw this picture, and I know why. So, how'd you get to meet Dog, the bounty hunter? All right, well, Shauno is he is like a photo op every time you're with him, so you always have to have your camera ready. I'm not sure who took this picture, and I'm not sure if he was in the aquarium and Peg was on the other side of the glass, but somehow he got this picture. Those of you who know Shauno as well as I do, or maybe better than I do, know Shauno is he is a photo buff, and he's always ready. He's always ready to pose. He's an avid dancer. But this is really what he thinks of himself. All right, so now this is a selfie, I believe, but you notice Shauno, he's sitting next to Peg, but Peg's not even a part of this selfie. It's just him. So in general, wherever we are for this meeting, Shauno and we find some restaurant somewhere. We've nearly died a couple times getting to those restaurants. We've ridden in the back of Dan Margoli's Volvo convertible with Peg lying across our laps because we couldn't fit everybody in the car. So I'm not exactly sure how we get through these meetings, but somehow we manage to. Now this, if you don't recognize, this is the Lowe's Resort. This is the golf course. And you might say, wow, what a great view of a tee shot. But in reality, the fairway is here. We're actually trying to figure out where Shauno's ball went over here. So needless to say, we never win the golf tournament. We can hit it, he hits it far, but we just don't know sometimes where they're going to go. So we're really lucky to have Shauno here to talk to us, and I'm sure you're going to hear a wonderful talk today called Surgical Lessons from the Lake. Your 2014 Claude Organ Memorial Lecturer, Dr. Shauno Kotari.
Thank you very much, Ken, for those kind words. For the record, that is the Mississippi River. That's what you do on the wake of a back of a boat, but that was only 3 seconds somebody got that picture. That's all I was up. But, all right, now if we can, all right. Well, it's truly a privilege. Again, I have been friends with Ken over these years, like he said. So, again, this is one of those great dinners that we did. Upon more forensic analysis of this photo, though, you can see, again, this is his lovely wife, Norma. Here is Ken. This is my wife. But if you zoom in, you'll see that's Ken's hand, a little bit below the equator. Nevertheless,
She laid across my lap.
oh my, that's how good a friend. Not too many people I'd allow to do that, but all right. My disclosures, this is my disclosure slide. It has nothing to do with my talk. My other disclosures are that my faith and my family are the most important things in my life. This was very similar to Claude Organ Jr. If you read his son's tribute to him in Archives of Surgery, you could see that maintaining a balance between surgery and family was both challenging and very important to his father, something I hope all of us continue to try and work on. And I love being a surgeon. It's really a privilege. According to CNN Money Magazine, we're ranked number 4th here in terms of best jobs in America. Not too shabby. But that being said, it does take its toll. The price that it takes to be a surgeon and physician and then go through the training, sadly, over 60% would retire today if they had the means. When they looked at nights on call, we've heard about this this week already, the hours and nights on call correlated with depression. When they surveyed the American College of Surgeons, or American Board of Surgery, I should say, surgeons thought, well, if you limited call, you decreased the amount of times I got sued, and you paid me more, life would be better. Can't argue with that as a surgeon. So, again, unfortunately, abuse of alcohol is not insignificant among both male and female surgeons alike. And only 51% would recommend their children pursue a career as a physician or surgeon. Somewhat even more disturbing is about 9% noted a major medical error, not a systems error, a major medical error that they had made, and burnout and depression were independent predictors of reporting a recent major medical error. For those of you in the academic realms, over 1,300 of you filled out a survey. What was most important in terms of workplace satisfaction? Governance, collegiality and collaboration, and relationship with your supervisor is what ranked the most important factors. Compensation was up there, but not as much. So getting along with others is important. From despair.com, it's easy to see how this slide rings true. Burnout attitudes are contagious. Mine might kill you. And at times, we can relate to this cartoon, really I'm fine. It was just a fleeting sense of purpose. I'm sure it will pass. So when you try to balance this work-life balance, what I do is I'm on the Mississippi River, and this is what I do. I spend time on it's called being a river rat, and you tie up your boats in what's called a raft off or a flotilla, and you hang out with friends and family, or you pull into a sandbar, this is Crater Island, where most of us can be spent every weekend on the Mississippi. Here you see how people get along, and they bring a little water slide here, impromptu, and get along. You have an adult beverage with some of your friends. Kind of hang out, and this is what you do to pass the time and enjoy the 3 days of summer in Wisconsin. No. But no, it is very beautiful on the Mississippi. These are the fall colors starting to kick in. Unfortunately, it is a river. It is bounded, obviously, on both sides by water, and these are trees, I should say, and this is a barge, this is a lock and dam, and this is what we have to battle. This is us coming through one. So every 20 miles, you have to go through one of these darn things, and it's very constricting, very confining in terms of the life on the river. So I'm privileged to work at an institution that tries to battle some of these things of burnout that we talked about and offers sabbatical. So after your first 10 years of service, you get, I forget how many, 25 days of sabbatical, and then every 5 years thereafter. Do a mission trip, take some classes, do some volunteerism, take some time off with your family, whatever you want to do, it's there for you to do. Now I took mine the day it became available. One day after I had made it, I took it, and I had always thought, wouldn't it be great to go out Lake Michigan? The freedom of no barges, no lock and dams to have to go through, and just wouldn't it be awesome to pull into to Mackinac Island and eat fudge and arrive by my boat. I thought that was my life's goal. And so La Crosse is right over here on the Mississippi River, and despite what this logo says on the front here, Wisconsin is landlocked, it's not an island. But you can get there both ways. You can go down the Mississippi River, up the Illinois River, up through the Chicago River, and get to Lake Michigan, which some of my friends have done. I just thought that would take too much time off of the precious time that I was given. So that meant pulling the boat out, putting it on a semi, and dropping it over in the lake, which is here it was safely plopped in 8 hours later with the Barbie bikes on front, strategically located. Now this is the path that we took. It's an absolutely gorgeous time, great memories, and I have no regrets about taking the time to do this with my two daughters, my wife, and our dog Max. So it's very beautiful for those who have not been to Lake Michigan, or both sides, the Wisconsin and Michigan sides. The beaches are as beautiful as anything you will see, and the sunsets, as you can see in here, are as beautiful as anything you will see in the Caribbean as well. Learned a lot on this trip. Michigami is where the name came from, great water, and very deep. You know, the average depth of the Mississippi River is 12 feet, you know, from here to New Orleans. So here it was unusual to be in such deep water. For those of you who are already wondering how it melted my credit card, these are the stats for you. It was 37 days on the lake, took 872 gallons of fuel, and 1,506 miles driven. Again, I'm not a mathematician, but Ronnie, you're probably smart enough to figure out that this was about 0.6 miles per gallon. So not the most economic means of transportation. And many people who own boats are simply intimidated by them. You know, when you look at the amount of switches and gauges and what it takes to drive these are six-figure investments that stay constrained in the slips because people are afraid to overcome the learning curve to learning them. Now I, on the other hand, I have a checklist. This is, of course, from my wife. It's her handwriting, and it's laminated, and it sits on our boat. And this is how I make sure we take care of the boat every time. We go through a checklist, because just when I think I have it memorized, I forget some switch or something like that, and then, because I am human, and it goes so far as even, this is the latest modification, was pick up the wallet and keys from basket, because otherwise I get up to the car after it's all zipped up and it's still on the boat and I got to go back down and get it. So I use a checklist, and guess what? They work. Surgical safety checklist, the study by Atul Gawande showed that significant decreases in mortality and complications by instituting a checklist. He's gone on to write a book about this. And when this simple checklist when we rolled this out, and I was the surgeon champion at our institution, our chairman of anesthesiology was adamantly against it. He was absolutely offended that it had pulse oximeter on patient and functioning. But when you looked at the study, there was X amount of patients that didn't, and they actually had to make sure that they had it on and it was functioning. He said, this is offensive to the anesthesiologists. We never forget it. I said, really? Well, then every time just say check if you never forget it. But the only way this was passed at our institution was to take that off of there, because that's how the leverage he had, and I told him I was going to disparage him at this talk. So I'm not talking out of class, but it's really sad. But not only do you have to have a checklist, you actually have to use the checklist, okay? So it's one thing to have it. Delta Flight 1141 lasted 22 seconds. Ironically, what were the two pilots talking about? They were talking about what would be their last words into the cockpit voice recorder if they were to crash, because they were talking about another recent crash. And they got in a hurry, their time was called up, they were fourth for takeoff, they hadn't finished their checklist, and they took off. What did they forget? They forgot to put the flaps down. Now, I'm not a pilot, many of you are, but I know the laws of physics that you can't get enough lift without the flaps extended. All right, this is the pulse oximeter for our anesthesia colleagues. It is, they say they never forget it. This flight lasted 22 seconds because they forgot to do the most common thing that they say they never forget. Well, maybe this was an N of one. No, these are all of the flights that have crashed because the flaps were in the wrong location or they forgot to put them down and the warning horn did not go off. What is the warning horn for us in our operating room? Our circulating nurse, who should stop you before you haven't done your checklist. Okay, now you have some integration as a mostly laparoscopic surgeon. Now we have the technology where honestly the equipment can't turn on unless you've finished your checklist. You can set it up that way, and it's time-stamped, so you can tell if you did it in 7 seconds or 45 or 60, and it's hardwired, embedded into the electronic medical record. So let's look at that data. Checklists work. They improve observed and perceived teamwork and communication. When you look at the highest quality studies looking at checklists, there was a strong correlation between the decreasing complications and adherence to those aspects embedded in the checklist. When we look at, this is surgical site infections, when you look at these forest plots, improvements in surgical site infections when checklists are adhered to, improvements in any complication, as well as an improvement in mortality. So use checklists. Now this is backing up the boat into the slip. It's one thing to take your boat straight out of the slip. It's another thing to have the skill to actually back it back into a slip when there's wind and current and everything going on around you. To this day, I'm still not sure whose dog this is, but nevertheless, it's not mine. I have a 12 and 13-year-old daughters, so when I got these tweens on the boat and they got their 8 friends back there and they're jamming to their music and everything's going on back there and a lot of stuff's going on, I say no. That's when we turn the music off, we send them down into the galley, they go play with their friends down there, we quiet things down so that we can concentrate on what is at hand. This is much similar to the analogy again to the sterile cockpit rule, which is during takeoff and below 10,000 feet, unless you're talking about the job, you can't have idle chit-chat going on. That last one I talked about was that Delta flight. There was some idle chit-chat going on that cost them. There was a violation of the sterile cockpit rule. And so we do the same thing on the boat. We quiet it down and focus on the task at hand. And when you look at the effects of noise in the operating room, there's an interesting recent study looking at this when they created a variety of conditions. Now, a lot of us like to use music. I'm a child of the 80s, so most of the residents are sick of my 7 hours of 80s on my iTunes, but that I play all the time. But nevertheless, when you look at the data, these are surgeons recalling and cognitive tasks and recalling words in communication. And you can see this is with them just asking to do it. This is when they're tasked with like an FLS task, like the peg, just simple pegboard or doing like that. When you add noise and then you add music, you can see a significant decline in the ability to communicate effectively in the operating room. For me, there are certain times when I turn off the music, particularly on, for example, like on a Heller myotomy. Once you get the ports in and do everything like that, that's fine. But once we actually get down to the actual time of doing the myotomy, particularly if I'm training the residents or fellows, that's when I turn the music off and we concentrate just on the task at hand. Now this is a picture of just Lake Michigan. What you see there, I don't know if it shows up or not, this says this is the graveyard of the Great Lakes. So these are all major shipwrecks, just the major ones, not the minor ones on Lake Michigan. So as I learned and studied for this trip over the last, in a year of preparation, I've learned that most people feared the Great Lakes more than the oceans when they've done what's called the Great Loop, which is down all the Great Lakes, down the Mississippi, up the eastern seaboard, back through all the Great Lakes, and it all connects. It's called the Great Loop. They fear the Great Lakes more than the ocean because the wave lengths are shorter in terms of the weather that can pick up. And then I met a captain who told me there's more shipwrecks on the Great Lakes than both coasts combined. It's a very precarious thing. So the day before we went out, we got there, I met with the harbor master and I said, okay, look, I'm a river rat. I'm from the Mississippi, so give me some rules. And he said, there's only one rule out here. And he goes, the weather rules. If there is bad weather, you do not go out on this lake. If it is predicted bad weather, you pull out the deck of cards, you sit on your boat, and you do not go out on this lake. He goes, the boat will handle more than you can, but do not go out on the lake. And I thought, okay. Well, this was what I was envisioning would be my trip on Lake Michigan. And the next morning, what was it? There was a storm in Chicago. We were up in Racine, Wisconsin, 3.5 hours away. I had friends already in Chicago who had beat us there. We had reservations at our favorite restaurant that night. So I got up, and it's not raining, it is a thunderstorm. And I looked at the forecast, and it is like that orange just blowing across Chicago on the radar map. So what did I do? We waited a little bit, and I pulled out of the harbor. He saw the kids on the boat. The harbor master runs out of the dock, and he comes down because he saw the kids, and he just looked at me like this and said, WTF. And I said, this is the window. This is as good as it gets. And we left. And this is what we entailed. Now this, as you can see, is my boat, and you can see no other boats on the radar. So for 3.5 hours, we were the only ones on the lake. Now we got a mile off, and this is that picture where it's about a mile off. You can just start to see the edge of the radar picking up the land over here. We got a mile offshore, and it's bouncing along, and it's a little rough. I thought, we can do this. We got 5 miles offshore. Now I'm looking out at these waves that are going by, and I thought, okay, yeah. And then we get 16 miles offshore. It's on autopilot GPS, heading towards Chicago, and the waves are coming over the top of the boat the whole way. The windshield wipers cannot keep up with it, and I went blind off of radar the entire way for the next 3 hours. Water was running through the sides of the boat, overwhelming the boat and coming down these edges, and there's 2 holes in the side of my boat. I never knew what they were for, and it was for when you're in a situation like this, and it's the overflow. It's water pouring all the way through the boat as we did this. So you can imagine what this is like. The only one sicker than my wife at this point was the dog. And this was what I've been waiting all these years to do now. So this is what I call, this was more like one of these Lieutenant Dan moments, as I've coined them. This was like me against God, and time for a showdown. Now you learn a lot about yourself in terms of your character and your faith and what gets you through situations like these. But this was, what I was thinking of from Forrest Gump at this point. But then came my daughter, who was reading her book. She came up out of the galley and sat next to me and said, Dad, are you scared? Now you got to think about this. Now I had studied, I knew how to do a mayday, I knew how to tell the coordinates, the latitude and longitude, and I knew to get that off before the boat sank and the batteries went underwater and you lose that. I had a floating radio. I knew how to make a debris field so that it was easier to be seen. The kids had their life jackets on. I knew the boat would handle more than I could. And white-knuckled, holding that steering wheel, I looked at my daughter and I did what any other father would do at that moment. I lied and said no. To which she promptly took her book and went back down and started reading. Thought, okay, let's look at that. Unanticipated events in the operating room. What do we do as surgeons in those times of a communication? Well, when they looked at this, these were live videos, like just rolling film, and they looked at things when bad things happened to surgeons. And they looked at the unanticipated intraoperative events. And this is what we as surgeons do, particularly with trainees, or in my case, my children, when things are going well. Look at the leadership behaviors. Very good. Okay? This is what we do when something bad happens. Our leadership behavior disintegrates when we are needed it the most. Okay? This is what we do to the trainees and to those in the room. Flatline. When our circulators and everyone needs the most leadership, we disintegrate in terms of our quality of leadership behaviors. Well, it was very nice to finally see Chicago. The storm had passed by the time we got there. We came in just some misty rain. This is Soldier Field, Burnham Harbor, and we were parked literally right behind it so that when I looked up there was Soldier Field. We did make our reservations, and this was at dessert. And at this point, again, over an adult beverage, I was able to contemplate my decision-making at this point. It again reminded me of the book, and again, full disclosure, Peter and I never talked about this, the book that he talked about, Forgive and Remember, about Eminem. Now, when you break this down, it was clear that I had made a judgment error. All of the signs were there. Do not go out on the lake, and I went anyway. When you think about surgical M&M, I'm reminded of this as well. The patient who's 3 days out from their colon resection, a little tympanitic, a little, maybe a little bit of diaphoresis, you're bolusing them, they're not making their urine parameters, it just don't look right, and you go and get a urinalysis and it's dirty and you say, it's a UTI, when everything is pointing to an early leak. So remember, again, the mistake I made was the judgment error. Our goal is to minimize these as much as possible. This is a shipwreck from the 60s that's still sitting there in Lake Michigan. A captain told me where it was. We had to go through here. These are the Manitou Islands. These are the Straits of Manitou. There are 60 shipwrecks right in this area alone. This season, who's been a certified captain since age 16, this season captain told me, you're going through there. I've only seen that water calm once in my entire career on the lake. That was encouraging. And he said, I'll give you the coordinates where there's a shipwreck. You got to go check it out. So this was it. But one thing you'll notice, it was calm. So somebody was looking out for us. But when you looked at this shipwreck, we think about the decision making. Were there technical factors? Yes, they lost their radar. But were there some judgment factors that went into that decision making? Who knows? But they ended up on the shoals, and our goals is to keep our patients from ending up with this type of an outcome. This is my wife, and I show this picture for a variety of reasons. One is the infinity line. There were times where you literally cannot tell the sky from the water. It's absolutely beautiful. And this also is not just to show her muscles, but the teamwork that we have on the boat in terms of captaining it when you're coming into port. Now that being said, she does drive the boat, and she is one of the few females that actually backs the boat into the slip, most of the time with minimal morbidity. So these are my daughters with a charter fisherman. This was his catch from the day, or one of them I should say, and I met him on the dock as we walked past him. And he said, as I walked past him, he said, "I like the way you handle your boat." I said, "Excuse me?" And he says, "Well, I followed you in off of the lake. I was behind you." And he goes, "And I liked the way you handled your boat." He goes, "Everyone on your boat had a job to do, and everyone knew their responsibility. And I liked the way you handle your boat." I thought that was kind of him. He then went on to fillet this and give it to us for supper that night. So when you look at this in terms of what works in terms of teamworks in the operating room, clearly there are structured approaches that improve this, the briefing before, the debriefing afterwards. And when you really look at what goes into getting a patient into the operating room and out of them, it's pretty amazing in terms of the interaction between the residents, the anesthesiologist, your fellow, your scrub tech, your job, the nurses. All of this interaction that is taking place that we are in charge of as captains of the ship to end up with this good, safe outcome. Claude Deschamps has broken this down and has written on this last year. Situational awareness, I think, is one of my strengths. I think keeping an eye on the operating room, knowing what things are going on, anticipating events is probably one of my strengths. I think I do okay in the leadership and management realm, but an area that I significantly need to improve upon, a blind spot of mine, honestly, conflict resolution. Now, I generate a lot of conflict. I leave a wake everywhere I go, just like my boat. But I am not very good at conflict resolution. That's a blind spot of mine and something that I need as a leader to get better at. Now, this is one you got to take back to your administrators and the people who run your operating room. When you walk in to do your case and you see the ortho scrub tech in your room, and the next day you see the ENT scrub tech in your room, and you say, "Where's my surgery scrub tech in my room?" And so the teaming curve, when teams work together, much like my family works on the boat together all of the time, how does this play out? Bottom line is, operative time is saved. The more you do cases together as a team, the shorter the operative time, And I'm jealous when I go to meetings and they put pictures up of their scrub tech and go, here's who I've operated with for the last 22 years. And I'm like, really? Because it's different every single day when I get into my environment. They looked at this with a fascinating study just published in the American Journal of Surgery this year, 2014, where they used the trauma man, sim man, and they took teams of residents and attendings and they put them through a variety of scenarios. And then after they did the scenarios, they debriefed with them and they taught them better leadership, communication, and behavioral factors, and then they redid the scenarios. And when you looked at them, the important thing is significantly improved leadership, cooperation, communication, decision-making, and situational awareness. Not only immediately afterwards, but these residents, everything, were able to retain this for a couple of weeks later when they redid this. This is the direction we need to be going, is improving our communication and the operating, working together as a team. An interesting study out of Scotland, looking at where they surveyed them. This is the disconnect we have as surgeons. What did the surgeons feel their leadership style was? Collaborative. What did the rest of the teams think? It was autocratic. So there was a disconnect in terms of what we think our leadership styles are. 5% of surgeons, when they queried, thought, well, I really didn't do a good job explaining what that operation was I was going to do today. 50% of the anesthesiologists and circulating nurses thought they didn't do a good job. Huge disconnect how we think we're doing versus what everyone else's perception of us is. So in conclusion for this session, providing a sense, showing this level of leadership provides a sense of psychological safety that is conducive to learning and improvement. Now you could say, doesn't mean I wasn't scared, but when I looked at my daughter and I told her, Daddy, are you scared? I said no. What that did is it provided psychological safety. She went back to reading her book, because if Dad's not scared, why should I be scared? That doesn't mean in our heart of hearts we aren't a little nervous when those things happen in the operating room, but we have to command a sense of leadership in that environment as that captain of that ship to get that patient and that crew through. Now, one of the most common questions we get asked, of course, is, did you always stay inside of land? Like that, knowing that would give you some kind of comfort. And the answer, of course, is no, you cannot cross Lake Michigan and stay inside of land. But let me tell you, it was pretty reassuring to come into port and see one of these bad boys guiding you in as a lighthouse. Now, these are a variety of pictures my daughter took. She is the future Ronnie Stewart. And you can see how she likes to get a little flag, like he likes to get a little rose petal here typically, and then there. But nevertheless, I learned a lot about lighthouses. We toured them. We studied them. A lot of them serve a variety of different purposes. But when you looked at them, look up at definitions of lighthouses. What is the purpose of a lighthouse? It's a tower and a beacon. It's illuminating and it serves as a reference. No question. Especially after being out there for those days and seeing them, a welcome sight. But you know what? So are our surgical mentors. They are towers and beacons, they are illuminating, and they serve as a reference. What challenges us? We heard some of this data this week on mentorship. And what is one of the biggest barriers to mentorship? Time. There simply isn't enough time in the day to take out to be mentored or to be a mentor. Less than 50% of medical students had a mentor when surveyed. Less than 20% of faculty members had a mentor. Women found it more challenging than men to find a mentor. And obviously it's important when you look at the things that mentors do: personal development, career guidance, choices in career. And not only that, 73% said that a mentor was important or very important in making decisions about future subspecialty training. And what did many of us do? We picked the specialty that our mentors did, because that's the influence they had on us. I think Dr. Russell summed it up best in his address to the college. Mentors are interested in their trainees not only professionally, but as human beings as well. They promote their trainees' efforts to balance professional and personal needs and obligations. They are, on multiple levels, a resident's or a student's support system and biggest fan. Now, personally, I know nobody who does this better than Dr. Murayama. He has an army of residents and medical students, as well as junior faculty, including myself, that he has mentored exceptionally over the years. Now, this is an interesting lighthouse. This one's smack dab in the middle of Lake Michigan. Now, we talked about the depth of the lake. It's hundreds of feet. But in the middle of Lake Michigan, it shallows up to less than 30 feet. And there are some shoals around here where there's been a lot of shipwrecks. So the shipping industry in the early 20s begged for this lighthouse to be built to help guide them through the Straits of Mackinac. So you literally come out here in the middle of Lake Michigan and have to take a 90-degree turn once you get to here and head this direction. It's literally a 90-degree turn to stay in the channel so that you don't potentially run ashore. And then this is coming in under the Mackinac Bridge. There's a freighter here. This is coming in under there. And then we achieved the pinnacle of our trip, which was to arrive safely at Mackinac. As we know, and many times in life, when we as surgeons set goals, these are privileged to actually have attained them. It's an absolutely gorgeous place for those who have visited. And there I am, finally eating my fudge, arriving by boat like I had set my goal a few years earlier. Now this is a port, and this is a storm. This is a port in a storm. Now, the way it works is these marinas and ports works is they're like hotels, like this. You call ahead, you give your Meridic, you call and you say, hey, you got room? You say the size of your boat, how much power you need and everything like that, and they see if they got room for you. Just you make reservations, you give a credit card, it's just like a hotel. Except one difference. By maritime law, if you are caught in a storm, you can hail them and say, port in a storm. And by maritime law, they cannot refuse you. They have to take you in and find room for you. So boaters are friendly people. They will figure out ways to get creative and share the power cords and get, in these types of scenarios. But this is a port in a storm, and this is when you have no business, like I was, being out on that lake. And this is when you get to the safe harbor. So our ICUs are our safe harbor. The principles of damage control surgery put forth back in the 80s are still tried and true to this day. The lethal triad of a patient becoming acidotic, hypothermic, and coagulopathic. Many of you are thought leaders in this field and have contributed significantly to this literature. And we know that the operating room is not the place to be for some patients. Controlling hemorrhage, the contamination, temp closing, and getting that patient to the ICU, to that safe harbor, is where you need to be at that time. So this is still going on today. This one's in press, soon to come out in Annals of Surgery. Our heroes over in Afghanistan that are taking care of our other heroes, the soldiers, and showing what they've continued to do in the principles of damage control laparotomy have significantly decreased the rates of fecal diversion, with only 6 patients in this series needing to be fecally diverted, and a remarkable only 16% mortality. So again, remember the safe harbor, remember that port in the storm, which is the ICU. There are sometimes the operating room is not the place to be, and by much like maritime law, they cannot refuse you. If you have a closed ICU, that's the time the patient still belongs in there regardless of what your policy may say. Now this is Washington Island. It's off the corner of Wisconsin, and I had made the mistake of thinking I was at this marina when I was really at this marina. So I realized I had to drive around the island, and I hadn't studied it. So I break out the maps here to see how to come into this port, and I backed off on the boat, and I know when I'm in control of the boat, but something had the boat. I don't know what it was. It just didn't feel right. I felt a little eerie. I just powered through it, came into the marina, got tied up, backed in. The harbor master came out. He shook my hand, and he said, "Welcome to death's door." And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I did not realize, living in Wisconsin all of these years, that Door County, which is where everyone goes to vacation, is named as French for the door to death because of the number of shipwrecks that have taken place just right here. So now I can see why these patients, or I should say why with these circulating waters and what I was experiencing, what this would have been like back in the day. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't visit it, because there is a restaurant there that won the Good Morning America's Best Breakfast Challenge for their Door County French toast with their cherries here. So that's what they're known for, but the Eggs Benedict looked pretty good, so I had to get that, which won the contest. And yes, and then the pound of the butter hash browns. And If there was any question, yes, I ate it all. So yeah, visit Door County and the Door County Cherries. But man, as I reflected on this experience of the wind and the waves overcome, I can't imagine how many shipwrecks were there. They've actually put a lighthouse there, and some of the beginning of the Coast Guard savings started right there because of those ships there. And I realized the wind goes this way, the waves go this way, and if you were at the mercy of the wind, I can imagine how hard it was to navigate that. But what did I do? Powered up 750 ponies and just came right through it. Well, it reminded me of what we do with the operating room now, with our reliance on technology. What do you do when the power goes off? Okay? Poor William Bovey, I tell this story to every one of my students in the operating room. PhD, worked for Cushing, and we made a few strides since principles of electrosurgery. But the poor guy sold the patent for $1, died penniless. His friends had to pay for his funeral, and his name's mentioned in every OR in the world every single day. Now, I always ask my students, would you rather have $1 billion or your name mentioned in your OR every single day as your legacy? You can pretty much guess which one they pick nowadays. But now we have so much technology at our disposal that it reminds me of this club and the game that we had that unfortunately was only a third place finish because of what I lack in talent. This club makes up for in technology. This is designed to be more forgiving, this club, and what they put into the club head here. It's designed to make me better than I really am, okay, to make up for my deficits. But isn't that what some of our technology is now? Clamp, clamp, cut, tie, tie is a phrase that very few of our trainees even know what that means anymore. Now we've replaced it with chimes and whistles and things that tell them when they've achieved hemostasis. Many of us know we took the clamp off, and when the patient started to write their name on the ceiling, we did a bad suture ligature. Okay? Now we wait for a certain tone to tell us that. It reminds me of my navigational skills. Am I really as good as those before me who used a sextant to do their navigation rather than GPS? Again, back to the pilots. They're no different. They say your computer skills get greatly enhanced, but your flying skills start to get rusty. Reminds me a little bit of my electronic medical record, too. I'm getting better at that, but what's getting rusty while we spend so much time doing that? And finally, there's the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds has to do with fuel consumption. Now, Mackinac Island's over here, just in the bit of Lake Huron, and here was Washington Island, and I had to make this run. And I had done all of the calculations on my boat, and I knew that I was either going to be very low on fuel or run out of fuel on one engine, come in on one engine, which is no fun. One engine has 25 gallons more than the other just to offset for weight balance on the boat. And I realized I'm here for pleasure. This is vacation. Why stress myself? I didn't want to take that risk. So right here is what's called Beaver Island. It's this 500 square mile island in the middle of Lake Michigan. And they're kind of interesting folks that live there. They've tried to succeed from the Union a few times, and it's a unique little outpost. But there's a marina there with fuel. And I realized if I'm going to make this, I got to stop here for fuel to be able to make it the rest of the way. It wasn't much to look at, but it wasn't as nice as some of the other places we saw there. And, this guy who owns 400 Burger Kings. But it was nevertheless, this is the docking station, and this is the fuel. We're finally putting the fuel in here. But it served its purpose to get me where I needed to go. Now, the rule of thirds has to do with 1/3 of your fuel should be used to get you there. 1/3 should be used for the return trip, and then you should keep 1/3 for reserves, for emergencies. I think of this not only in terms of our physical well-being as we get through our careers, but also our financial well-being to make it through our careers. The retiring age continues to rise for general surgeons in our country for a variety of reasons. This study by the Doctors Company showed that it increased from 63 to 66 in 2008. Now, not everyone could say this. I would not mind being operated on by a surgeon of 91. Now, who do you think said that? Michael DeBakey said that at 91. So not everyone's a Michael DeBakey, okay? The rest of us mere mortals. On the other hand, though, okay, say that the recent recession has changed their retirement plans. And this depressing story called The $1 Million Mistake, Becoming a Doctor, looked at this. When you looked at the average debt of a graduate, and 28% of us saw a pay cut last year, and you looked at, well, had you just got out of college and gotten a job for $50,000 a year for those 10 years, you would have had $500,000. And then if you actually paid off your debt at 7.5% interest, that's almost $500,000. So there's the $1 million mistake of becoming a doctor. Well, so what do we do as surgeons to make up for this? We invest poorly, okay? Doctors, and surgeons in particular, are not very good at business knowledge. So they rated them in a survey, and bottom line is, these are the areas that we need a significant improvement as surgeons. So if you can take the time to learn more or get mentored by people or have a financial advisor so that you can make it through your career, that is clearly to your benefit. Because as the sun begins to set on one's career, some difficult choices have to be made. A study looking at the cognitive functioning of surgeons, older versus younger, comparing them, showed that it was somewhat encouraging. 78% of surgeons who were ages 60 to 64 were able to keep up with the cognitive tasks of those in the 45 to 55 range. And even 38% of surgeons over age 70 could hold their own against their younger counterparts. But it doesn't change the fact that the older we get and the bigger the operations we do with less frequency based on our age, the mortality actually goes up. Sadly, 11% of retired surgeons on an ACS survey had no plans. Nothing, they had no plans. So Walter Ritchie, the past president, the chair of the ABS, recently wrote some thoughts on this. He said, plan a transition time. Take 3 or 4 years to begin looking at these things. Maybe get another degree. This is your chance now, maybe, to do this. And volunteer for things, you know. Go back and do that. Does anyone know what Walter Ritchie does? No. Ken? No idea. He went back and got a certificate in understanding architectural stuff, and he leads volunteer tours in downtown Philadelphia for the historical portion of your town. So one of my favorite books is entitled Finishing Well, and this is interviews with like 60 highly successful CEOs and business people. But it's the follow-up to his book, Halftime. And the whole take-home message of this book is, how do we transition your lives from being one of success to one of significance? And I would argue that everyone in here is extremely successful in what we do. But the real challenge is making your life, transitioning it to one of significance. Some people changed careers, some people backed off and ran parallel careers. But a fascinating book to see how these people did this. And I would encourage it to anyone who wants to think along those lines. So as we concluded the trip, this is the view of Racine, Wisconsin, coming back into the port that we had originated from. And so in conclusion, use checklists. They decrease the complications and even some mortality at times. And so I encourage you to continue to use them. The sterile cockpit rule, remember it. There's times when to turn the music off and only use and get rid of the idle chit-chatter and only focus on that which is important on the task at hand in the operating room. Forgive and remember. The lessons learned from M&M conference, continue to use those and respect that. Decrease our technical errors and decrease our judgment errors if at all possible. Teamwork and communication. We're not as good as we think we are. Always room for improvement in terms of our ability to communicate and our leadership skills. Remember our lighthouses, our mentors, and please be one for someone else. Remember the ICU, a port in the storm, safe harbor. There are times you do not want to be in the operating room, and the safest place for that patient is the intensive care unit. Remember the door to death, our reliance on technology. For the residents, ask them to, you're attending, let's do a hand-sewn anastomosis instead of relying on stapler technology and things of that nature. Remember how to do things if the power to go out. And remember the rule of thirds, both for physical and financial well-being. A third to get you there, a third to get you home, and save a third for emergencies. Tyler Hughes was interviewed when we talked about those best jobs in America, and he said, being a surgeon is an amazingly fulfilling life. It's not about how many dollars you have in the bank or who thinks you're important. It's about taking care of a community and knowing you made a difference. And don't forget to have fun. We have a great job, and it's been a privilege to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much.